So we'll begin discussing. We know there are 613 commandments in Judaism, and the 10 commandments, they say 6 plus 1 plus 3 equal 10. It's not really called the 10 commandments. If you look in the Hebrew, it's the Aseres Hadibros. It's the 10 statements, 10 principles. The 10 principles equal the 613 commandments. Where do we find, let's say, not to embarrass someone in the 10 commandments? So, Rav Sat Jul, one of the great earlier Gaonim, he has a whole book on, he goes through every mitzvah, how he ties it in to one of the 10 principles. So where do we find not to embarrass someone?
Not to kill someone.
Correct.
Worse than kill.
Exactly, not to murder, because the Gemara tells us you embarrass someone publicly, you turn, they turn from white to red, red to white, whatever you turn. That's ki'ilu shofech dam, it's like a shedding blood. And in fact, it's even worse. At least the person's dead. This person is constantly embarrassed. So, and he goes through examples like that. And you go deep down, you'll find within the Aseres Hadibros, you find the 613 commandments. And that's why we find by the 10 commandments, we have 2 tablets. Why 2 tablets? Why not 10 tablets? Why not one command on each tablet? Why 2 tablets? So I'll tell you the joke first, and I'll give you the real answer. The joke goes how God came down to all the nations of the world. That part's true, but that God came down to all the nations of the world and asked them to accept the Torah. So they said, what's in it? So God told one of them, lo sirtzach, not to murder. Okay, it's not for me. Next nation, not to commit adultery, not for me, etc. And he gets to the Jews and says,
not to commit adultery was Moab.
Yeah, Moab, yeah, or Yishmael, the different versions of the Midrash actually, right? And they said, he went to the Jews, so they said, how much? He said, free, we'll take 2. That's why we have 2 tablets. But on a serious note,
one is for...
Right, well, the 2, as the Talmud tells us, the 2 basic categories of law. Right. The first 5 are commandments between man and God,
right,
and the second 5 are commandments between man and man. And if you look at first glance, one seems to be out of place. Honoring one's parents is on the 5th one. Is the 5th one on the first tablet?
Right.
Last I checked, parents are people too. So that's what the commentators explain. It's a unique commandment that they're also your creators, mommy, daddy, and God, and therefore it's a perfect transition to go from one side of the tablet to the next, honoring your parents as both. I'll tie this part into tefillin right now, and that's why we know we wear the tefillin shel yad, the tefillin on your hand, and you have the tefillin shel rosh. So the commentators explain what do they symbolize, what does the tefillin on your hand symbolize, and what is it? So the 2 basic categories of commandments. The arm represents commandments for Adam L'Chaveiro, interpersonal between people, and the head represents for Adam L'Makom, commandments between man and God. And why? Because your head is, so that's something where it's all about your thought. Like in Judaism, so actually I was speaking to religious professor at Mac. He's retired now. Sam knows him. I won't mention his name. Not that he said anything bad.
Mention his name.
Okay, Robertson.
Oh, Robertson. Yeah.
And so
I saw him at Solomon
yeah,
Village.
no, exactly. I was just, we had a long talk. Different. He was religious. Yeah. So one of the things he was asking about, what does Judaism focus on more? Is it based, action or the thought process? So, because I know in all the books they say the difference between Judaism and Christianity is deed versus creed. That Judaism is a religion of deed, of action, and Christianity is more of a religion of faith, of creed. So I said, it is true, we do focus on deed, but in Judaism as well, we also have fundamental beliefs as well. The Maimonides gives us the list of the 13 tenets of faith. And I said, perhaps one way we could explain it is it depends what kind of commandments we're talking about. If it's commandments between man and God, that's mostly to do with the thought process, what you're thinking, because God knows what you're thinking, and therefore even a good thought, you planned on putting on your tefillin this morning, but something came up, or you planned on, so it's okay, God knows you really wanted to do it, and we have a principle, machshava tova mitzdaref lama, a good thought is counted as doing a good deed. However, when it comes to commandments ben adam l'chavero, interpersonal, they're much more result-oriented. I could have all the best intentions, but if I didn't help you across the street, if you were falling down, I didn't want to help you. I was thinking it'd be a great mitzvah to help you, and I keep on going. Or I know I should go to the hospital and visit, but now I'd rather watch the game. Doesn't really do anyone any good. So when it comes to commandments between man and God, the focus is on the machshava, is on the heart and the lave and what you want. But when it comes to commandments interpersonal, it's result-oriented. As our rabbis tell us, if I was walking down the street and I dropped a $50 bill, I didn't even know, it fell out of my pocket, I wasn't pickpocketed, and lo and behold, a poor person picked up the $50 bill. In a case where they couldn't return it to anyone, they were allowed to keep it, I get the mitzvah of tzedakah, because the bottom line is, I helped this person, he was able to eat for a whole week now. So when it comes to ben adam l'chavero, it's more about the result. That's why when the Gemara talks about having mitzvah strichas kavana, you have to have intent to do the commandments. So if you notice it always talks about it by shofar, by lulav, by tefillin, all the commandments between man and God. That's when you have to be more aware. Mitzvah strichas kavana. But when it comes to ben adam l'chavero, commandments between man and man, that we don't find that, because the purpose is the result oriented and not about the thought. Yes, Sam.
I think there's an interesting political implication here too. I remember back in the 60s when I was involved in the civil rights movement, even in Washington.
Oh, did you walk with what's his name?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Martin Luther?
Yeah.
Was Heschel there?
Well, there were 200,000 people there. I didn't notice that.
No, that was one of the.
I'm sure
that came up in today's conversation with Robertson. So
right.
Someone was saying Heschel was there.
Well, back then.
Now I could say Sam Eisenstadt. Don't forget about Heschel.
Yeah,
I think you were there.
Right.
Okay.
Well, back then, it was very commonly said in the civil rights movement, and maybe Martin Luther King himself said it, I don't care whether you love me or hate me inside your head, as long as you treat me the same way you treat everybody else, according to the law. So that was a matter of
interesting, yeah.
Part of what he was drawing on there was the age-old liberal tradition of a difference between the private and the public realm. There is such a thing as law, and as long as you're obeying the law, no one is asking you how you feel about it, whether you like me or not. But in fact, over the years, that changed considerably. Either it doesn't work, or people didn't feel that was enough. So you begin to get political correctness, which says it's not enough for you to treat me right. You inside your head, you have to love me.
But how could they control that? No one knows what's in your head.
Well, exactly. How do you control that?
In fact,
you put people in jail when they say things.
But then they're saying things, then
well,
that's
then
not
the question is saying things on the side of action,
good question.
Or is it on the side of expressing?
That's the Gemara's question. Is Dibor, is speaking considered like action, or is speaking considered like,
that's a big question.
So it depends. It depends by, if by speaking, the Gemara, if you scare the cow or the animal into doing something, then sometimes speaking can count like an action.
Right.
But the general speaking is not an action.
Yeah, well,
it's considered not an
that's
idea.
Good,
yeah.
Because if law could control action and speech was action, there would be no such thing as free speech. So all these things come up when you somehow. It's very nice to say that your attitude toward your fellow man is something that you don't quite owe it so much to your fellow man as you owe it to God, whereas your action in regard to your fellow man, that is something you owe directly to to your fellow man, that makes for a system in which you can, to some extent, leave people alone to have whatever relationship with.
Right. But interesting, the same thing that Martin Luther King said is that's what, for those who, let's say today, I'd say Jews and many right-wing Christians, are at least, we have share the same interests, friends, and people have the same line. But they say, well, what do you mean? The reason why they want you to go to Israel because they want the Messiah to come.
Yeah.
And then either you believe in Jesus. So people say like, I don't care what they're thinking. They could think I'm going to Gehenna Manah as long as they treat me well. I don't really care what's going on in their mind. Well, let's say the guy
it's a very good way for people to cooperate when they believe entirely different things.
As one example, let's say someone donated $1 billion machine. It saved lives, whatever the specific sickness. So, but he made one arrangement. Number one, you have to have my name all over the machine, and anytime anyone uses it, and before and after, you have to again tell them I donated it. So the guy's dying, and the only way to save his life is he uses the machine. You think he cares that this guy's on an ego trip? He couldn't care less about what the guy's intentions are. The bottom line is, if you're saving my life, I'm grateful. I don't really care, what your motivation is.
Right.
So let me just point out that is true, result-oriented, and that's what and that's the difference I was getting to. The Tefillin Shel Yad represents action. Tefillin Shel Rosh represents thought. So when it comes to commandments of man and God, it's more about the thought process. When it comes to Ben Adam Chavero, it's all about action. And interesting, the way you put on tefillin in the morning is you put on your Tefillin Shel Yad first. You go up to your arm, then you put on your head, and then you finish off the yad. And when you take off your head first, and then your hand. So if you notice, you're never only wearing your head tefillin, you are sometimes wearing. So what's the lesson is, of course, to be a complete Jew, you have to keep both sides of the tablets. But if you have to keep the basics, but when you want to take on extra, you want to ground yourself. Where do you have to begin? Begin working on your commandments with people that not to speak evil gossip, not to do things. You never left this doing commandments with man and God without any menschlichkeit, then it's not going to be worth anything. You never left with only the Tefillin Shel Rosh. You have to ground yourself in the Tefillin Shel Yad, and then you have the Rosh. Well, you have to get the basics. In fact, that's what some like saying is, if you're a parent, everyone likes to parent their children to treat them properly and to love them and all that, but perhaps, I guess I'll throw it out there if you agree with it, but people claim, but the best thing for a parent, even better than the child loving you, is when the brothers and sisters, when the siblings get along, that even gives greater nachas to the parent. You could agree. I'm assuming that's true. You could agree or disagree. So if you agree, that's what they say, the same thing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course you have to treat HaKadosh Baruch Hu properly, but he gets even more upset if you don't treat your brothers, because we're all God's children, and he sees the children fighting, that causes them a lot more harm than you do something. In fact, that's what we've been reading about in the whole book of Bereshis. When it came, why did God destroy the world with the flood? Because the bottom line was they went around stealing. They weren't treating each other properly. But when they were mocking God, building the tower of Babel, building a tower to shoot arrows, God's response was laughter. Okay, good, we'll knock down. In other words, when it comes to, on an individual level, it might be different. On a communal level, especially, God's much more interested in how people treat one another than how you treat Him. Of course, you have to treat everyone properly, but in terms of on a public level, God has a lot more tolerance when you're not obeying His commandments 100%, but zero tolerance if you're mistreating someone else, another human being, then He really gets steaming.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes, Sodom and Gomorrah.
They weren't treating each other properly.
Yeah,
We
absolutely. Yes.
won't go into detail, but that was their problem.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what.
Remember?
You could be. The what?
Oh, we were in the advanced class last week with Rabbi Selevan, and I can't remember how we got onto the topic. We were talking about the flood. We were talking about Noah, and I said that the reason, a lot of people believe that the reason that it happened in the first place was because of stealing.
Yeah, Rashi quotes it from Chazal.
Right.
Yeah. Well, nichtam gzardinam el al gezel. It wasn't the only reason. There was a lot going on, but the final blow was because. But let me explain what they mean by stealing.
From each other.
Stealing from each other, but you know what they were doing? They were, again, according to the Jewish tradition, the Midrashim, that there's a certain amount you have to. I'll make up the amount. Let's say you have to steal a quarter's worth in order to go to the court of law and get in trouble. So they were going around stealing 20 cents at a time. Eventually 20 cents adds up, but they were going just doing and constantly stealing from people where there was no punishment. That's why one Hasidic Rebbe said that's why the flood,
rain,
Babel, drop one drop at a time.
Right.
That was the Midah
right?
That was the Midah Keneged Midah. But in terms of, in terms of that's how they point out that. But let me just point out, and even though I'm saying between man and man, it's result oriented, but I'm not. I want full disclosure. There are actually two aspects of commandment. There's two verses. One is Acharei Hashem Teilechu. We follow in God's ways. And how do you follow in God's ways? You'll get burnt up. So the Talmud says no. It's like He clothes the naked, we help the poor. He visits the sick, we visit the sick.
He visited Abraham.
Correct.
He dresses the bride.
Yeah, He visited Yitzchak after Abraham's death, etc. So how do you become more godly? By, as we said, Abraham was in the middle of speaking to God, and he left to take care of the three angels, and he did
hospitality.
Exactly. So we see, if you want to become more godly, you can become more godly doing acts of imitation than you are actually speaking to God. That's one verse, and it's probably the most famous verse in the Bible is what? Or one of them, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor like yourself. So what do we need they have two verses seem to teach me the same thing, that we have to be nice to one another. So that's what the commentators point out, the two different aspects of Ben Adam l'Chaver, interpersonal. Well, we'll call, let's say, Chesed versus Tzedakah. Like, as I pointed out in three ways, Chesed is greater than Tzedakah, acts of loving kindness, because charity can only be done to the poor, Chesed to the living and the poor. Charity can only be done with money, Chesed even to the bodily exertion, and charity only to the living. The ultimate Chesed is helping in the burial. So besides the quantitative difference, there's a qualitative difference, and that is, where does it originate from? Like you're walking down the street, you get a phone call, someone calls up, a beggar comes to you and says, I need some money. And being you're a good person, you go ahead and give. If I wasn't thinking about giving it, someone approached me and I'm happy to do it. So that's more of an external thing. But Abraham, he had a desire, he had to do a good deed. Whether it's going to be to Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Sarah, Rivka, it doesn't make a difference who it's going to be until I have to do a good deed. And therefore, because the whole incident with Abraham was for him, the angels didn't eat. So we see there's two aspects really of Chesed. One is result-oriented, like we were talking about, but there's another aspect that, so from Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that's the bottom line. You have to help the other person. But as I said, if I drop a $20 bill out of my pocket, I don't become a better person. I don't even know I did it. Part of Acharei Hashem Teilechu is the awareness. I have to be aware I am doing something, a good deed. I am aware I'm being godly. And the more acts we do of good deeds, the more godly we become. So in truth be told, we have both aspects within Ben Adam l'Chaveiro. We have the result-oriented, but we also have, if you want to become godly, you have to be aware what you do. You can't, like the Gemara talks about, there was a big levaya going on. So you had a curious onlooker. He was walking by. You'd say, wow, all these people, let's check it out. But he wasn't there to do the mitzvah of Nicham Avelim, and he didn't even get to see the person. So interesting, the inverse is someone who's pressured into doing an act of kindness. In fact, there's a discussion, can you coerce someone to do an act of kindness? Is that within the realm? Does it make any sense? So some say no, because if you're coerced, let's say someone unworthy comes to your door and you feel pressure to give him charity, so perhaps you get nothing. If he's unworthy, you don't get the mitzvah of tzedakah. If you don't really want to do it, you're giving it begrudgingly, you're not becoming godlike either. That would be the inverse of it. But we strive in the other direction to give to the worthy, and we give with the awareness that we should become like God, and therefore to really both aspects. So it's true you have the two tablets, but within Ben Adam L'Chaveiro you also have both elements as well. You have the result-oriented aspect as well as the awareness to become a better person.
But on the whole, I think the result aspect in Judaism takes precedence, because if I give a starving man food because I happen to want a good reputation in the community,
that's
the
okay.
starving man is still getting the food.
100%. The bottom line is, in fact, that's why the famous question, why don't we make blessings on all these commandments? Charity, visiting the sick, comforting the mourners, all these Be'adam L'Chaveros, why don't we make brachas on? So Maimonides writes, we don't make blessings on commandments we only make blessings on commandments between man and God. We don't make blessings on commandments between man and man. Why not? So the commentators explain, because imagine the scene. A poor person shows up at your door. Please, I'm very hungry. Please, I need food. Oh, great. You run into the kitchen. You get the chicken, the potatoes. You get the salad already. Just 1 second. Baruch atah Hashem. And the time you finish the bracha, the guy faints from starvation. So obviously, when the rabbis were setting up the mitzvah, they didn't want the blessing to interfere with the performance of the mitzvah. So therefore, any time you're going to do a mitzvah, the point is the result, and it's twofold. And a second reason is on the same line is, you don't make a blessing because part of all these commandments of interpersonal is to develop a friendship with someone, a shalom v'reus. So you say, you want to show the person, I'm doing it because I care about you, not because I have to do it. Like the story where the husband and wife were having a little, marital spat, whatever. So he went to his, I guess they were newly married, etc. So he went to his Rebbe, his rabbi, and said, what should I do? He said, you were arguing over something as silly as that? Just go bring us some flowers and go apologize, whatever. So he comes home, he says, here's the flowers. My rabbi said I had to get you flowers. So clearly it's not going to be effective. It's not that, it's the flowers. The flowers, you're doing something where you're showing you want to make up. So when you're doing something, you say, wait a second. God, I'm doing it because God commanded me. I don't really care about you, God. So we de-emphasize. It is true that God does, but we want to de-emphasize that fact. We want to focus on, I'm doing something because I care about you. And that's why, in fact, the Rambam, Maimonides, will have this on the category of sin. This counts as the sin class also. In the sin class, Maimonides writes in the Shmona Prakim, he writes, because he talks about the Greek philosophers. He says, what the Greek philosophers say the highest level is? Plato, Aristotle, that the highest level is not even to have a desire to sin. You should work on yourself. Kulo naki menachet. I don't even have a desire to sin. And the Rambam says, Aristotle is one of the smartest guys I ever met, and I would say he's right, except the prophets have told us otherwise. The higher level is to have a desire and not succumb to. That's even a higher level.
But
go on.
Jeremiah does say that in the time of the Messiah, the law will not be outside of me, but it will be inside of me. So in fact, I precisely will lose the desire to sin, and everything what I should do is going to be exactly what I want to do. He says exactly that. So in a way, this business of, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's the law, that is for now, and at least according to Jeremiah, when the Messiah comes, that's going to be, there's not going to be this break.
Well, it depends. I'll get to that in a minute, but that could be, it's not clear that it's not, according to Maimonides, the only difference between the time of the Messiah and now is that that we're going to be running the world. Everything else is going to be the same.
But he's not reading Jeremiah here.
No, I'm just saying it depends.
It's what Jeremiah says.
No, but we have to know what he means. I'm not disagreeing. Let me finish off my point. The Rambam says it. So then, but the Maimonides says it depends what type of. I want to, because the point I'm making. It depends. That's only true on commandments between man and God. On commandments between man and man, it's not true. In other words, you shouldn't feel, I really want to murder you, but God says I'm not, so therefore I won't. Or I really want to punch you in the face. No, the Rambam is not the right. When it comes to interpersonal, no, then the Aristotle's is right. When it comes to interpersonal, that is the high law. You should feel, you should want to do the good. It should become ingrained in you, because if you want to be God, God wants to do the good deeds. He said, when it comes to commandments between man and God, why am I shaking the lulav? It's not I want the thought of shaking the lulav on my own. That's something because God told me to do, or a commandment to man. So then he says the higher level is I really want to eat that treif. I really want to eat those pork chops. I heard they in Tony Romo they have these great ribs, and I really want to eat there. Or you walk by this it smells so good. I really want to eat it, but what could I do? My God in heaven said not to. So even the Rambam makes a distinction between, so maybe he's not even arguing with Jeremiah anyway, it depends on what we're talking about. When it comes to midos, that you want it ingrained in you. In fact, that's why the famous question of the Drashas Haran, why was Abraham so carefully wanted to find his wife back in his old town of Haran, when he sent Eliezer to go? Why didn't he just find, we couldn't find the wife where he was living now? And both places were Ovdei Avodah Zarah, were idol worshippers. So if they're both idol worshippers, what's the big deal? Just find someone close by. And the Drashas Haran explains no, because it's true they were both idol worshippers, but the people from Avram's hometown, they had good midos. They had good characteristic traits. And what the Haran writes is to change someone's philosophy. That's more external. That if you re-educate the person, you talk to them, and you have some, logical discussions, it's easier to change. So if someone's misled, if you talk to them, explain to them your way, they might see it. But midos are ingrained in you. It's not you can always work on yourself and change, but it's much harder to change a bad characteristic trait than it is a bad thought. That you can change. In fact, as one of the great Bali Musa, Rabbi Selevan, he started the Musa movement. Of course, there was Musa before him, but he was the one who, incorporated and spent more time on it. He used to always say, it's much harder to change one bad midah, one bad characteristic trait, than it is to finish the whole Shas, all the Talmud. It's not because it's easy to finish all the Talmud. That's a lot of work. But that is emphasizing that's how hard it is to change, and that's what Avram is. In terms of, don't worry, I'll speak to you about ethical monotheism. I think I could get you to change your mind. But to get someone to go from a bad person to a good person, of course it could be done. We believe anyone could change, but that's a lot harder. That's more inside you ingrained, and you got to do a lot more work on that. Yes, Sam.
No, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so that's what they point out here. That midas were always. So when it comes to midas, that's what Maimonides agrees. That's the whole point of Acharei Hashem Teilechu. You should do all those acts of kindness, not because, of course, you're doing it because you know it's a mitzvah as well. But the emphasis isn't because God says I have to visit the sick. The emphasis should be because the person needs me. I want to help this person. I want to go and heal by going to doing my visiting the sick. I'm helping heal. I comfort the mourner. I want to do it because I really want to help the person. He needs people. He shouldn't be alone, etc.
So it shouldn't be based on obligation.
Right. So
you shouldn't feel obliged.
Exactly.
To go. You should want to go.
Exactly. But even though the obligation is there, but that shouldn't be the focus of it. Right. When I'm shaking the lulav, why else am I doing it? If God didn't, else either I'm crazy or I take God commanding me over being nuts. Why else would someone shake around with a lulav esrog and put these things that you're crazy walking around with 4 species? I'm only walking around with 4 species because why am I eating matzah? I like fresh bread. Because God commanded me. So when it comes to those commandments, the emphasis could be because God commanded me. When it comes to interpersonal, it's true you are commanded, but that shouldn't be the focus when you're doing it. It should be focused on the person's needs, and both, on his needs, and you yourself aware that you're imitating God, so therefore both people, you're helping that person, as well as you're becoming more godly, you're becoming a better person. And that's what...
It's good to have those obligations around, even if they render the act second rate.
Right,
without them, a lot of good things would not get
No,
done.
exactly. So we see, we don't have to go too far, because people people think I agree in terms of I think it's very important to legislate goodness, not in, because in terms of, because you see, if it's going to be based on the heart or how I feel, we don't have to go back too far to see what could happen if there's no God, there's no objective good in terms of, that's what, in fact, Abraham, when he was, but why did he say he told Sarah to be his sister, not his wife? It's interesting to note that
because he was afraid.
I know, but it's interesting to see the morality then. They weren't afraid, adultery, that was a big issue. Oh, if it's your wife, but killing this murder, that's not so much. It's interesting to note that they weren't afraid to murder him, but adultery, like as the joke goes, how do you keep with them, those certain fundamentalist terrorists? They say, when they were saying, if the people had no clothes on in the airplane, they wouldn't be able to go on the plane, and you wouldn't have to worry. That, but people have, war. In certain way, murder is not a problem, but that I'll take care of. But also saying that was Micha in the prophet. That was he said, what does God want from us? But to be a good, to be a good person.
He put Sarah in danger when he let her go to the house.
No, so actually he didn't put it.
No, he was trying to eliminate danger for himself.
Right, he was in danger.
He was eliminating danger for himself, and she's probably his niece.
No, she wasn't. No, she wasn't in danger.
She wasn't really his sister. She was his niece.
I know.
But he was putting her in danger. She's going to another man's house.
No, but he wasn't. No, but he said.
No, because she was so beautiful, there was no danger. He was trying to eliminate the possibility of being...
She was so...
The danger wasn't they weren't going to kill her.
Right.
They were going to kill him to get to her.
Right.
Okay, she wasn't in danger because Hashem would protect her. But on the other hand, she's going there into someone else's house. They could sleep with her.
Right, no, I'm saying that's what... In fact, that's what Avimelech said. Why didn't you tell me she was a married woman? Of course, me. So what did Abraham answer? Very interesting. Rak Ein Yiras Hashem b'makam hazeh. You know what? There's no fear of heaven in this place. And you say, no matter what, you could be the most civilized country. We don't have to go back to Nazi Germany and any other place. The most civilized country. We're not the white trash. We listen to Beethoven and rock. If you don't have Yiras Hashem, as Rav Selevan writes in his essays, he lived there during the time or before. He said he noticed these tremendous philosophers in the universities, as the political climate changed, they were giving all these drushas on Bet Adam al-Chaveiro, but as the climate changed, their drushas changed also. And if you don't have fear of God, then not only you're choshesh for Ritzicha. Abraham was afraid they'd kill me, because if there's without God, anything's possible. And that's why, in fact, the joke goes, you could, whether you want to put in Oxford, Harvard, Yale, but they say the joke goes like this, that someone was going on a safari trip in Africa, and he was caught by cannibals, and they put him up, whatever, they're about to put him under cook him up, have a nice meal, and he recognized one of his friends from like Oxford, Harvard, Yale, whatever you want to name, and he said, oh, I know you, we went to Harvard together. He said, what happened? Didn't you learn anything in Harvard? How could you become a cannibal? And he said, yeah, now I use a fork and knife when I eat. So,
the cannibal went to university?
Yeah, exactly. That's what he's saying. Home. The point being is, etiquette, it's all nice, but we see what happened with the Nazis, they're very careful not how to treat the animals, to be in line, to say please. But you can throw out all the etiquette in the world. If there's no fear of God, if there's no objective morality, then we're concerned, not even they're not going to be good, that we're concerned that even, our life is in danger. And unfortunately, we've seen it, not too long ago.
Just one more thing has to be added to that.
Okay.
And that is, in a place where there is no morality, you can't afford to practice pure God-fearing morality because it's going to get you killed.
No, you have to do it more because you get sucked into the prevailing culture.
You have to say that your wife is your sister.
No, you have to.
He did.
Torah is the life route.
That's not changing morality. That's a life. That's a life. That's true. In terms when your life's in danger.
Okay.
No, you have to lie. I mean, if it's a mitzvah to lie, it's not to.
I don't know if it's a mitzvah to lie, but it's certainly necessary.
Well, to save your life. To save your life, it's the same as murdering.
It depends. You have different values. I'm saying.
Well, then two mitzvahs are in conflict with each other.
Exactly.
The world is a tougher place than we're admitting.
I know, Sam. Yeah, I know. We've had different values, and obviously, living outweighs the value of telling the truth in this instance, right? And and therefore, let's say someone was running away from the Nazis, and they asked you, "Do you know where any Jews are?" So if you tell them they'll kill them, so then obviously the value of saving a life outweighs the value of telling the truth, etc. Right. So that gets into that's coming up in this week's parsha. We could get into that.
Even better.
I won't be at the Shabbat, but that's the whole question with the Bechorah, and with Esav and Yaakov, in terms of telling the truth. What
that's one reason we talk about the Messiah in a big sense, and that is we really can dream and look forward to a world in which you don't have to break one mitzvah in order to do another one.
100%. Yeah, no, of course. It's not. No one's saying.
Yeah.
It's just the reality of life that it's easier to choose good from bad. Meaning, I might say it's easy to actually do it by physically. It's logical. You can tell. The difference between good and evil. Choosing between good and good is a lot harder decision. So, choosing you have two good. In fact, you have two big mitzvahs in front of you: visiting the sick, or comforting the mourner. Which one takes precedence? That's a separate class.
Comforting the mourner.
Yeah.
That's Maimonides' opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
Because they're mourning. Because they're at their weakest point.
Well, but someone's sick, and again, I'm not talking about someone who's in life threatening, but
it could be. Right? I mean, their souls in a...
Yeah, I'll give a whole class on it, but the bottom line with the Rambam says the reason is because Nicham Avela, and comforting a mourner, is a double kindness.
Yeah.
It's a kindness to the living and a kindness to the dead. While Bikar Chom is only a kindness to the living. And needs a lot more discussion, but I'm just saying, that's what Maimonides says, that Nicham Avelam, that's a much harder decision. You have two good things to do. What do you do first? But in terms of
between going to see,
should I go break into a store and steal, or should I go do Bikar Cholim? So obviously it's an easy choice. Yeah. It might be hard. It might be hard what you're actually going to do, but you'll know what the right thing. Whether you actually do the right thing or not, that's something else. The first step usually is to know what the right thing is, and then you have a better chance that you might actually do the right thing. If you don't even know what the right thing is, then you usually have more issues. Any questions? Any more questions? We've had plenty of comments. So I'm not sure what they say.
Of course, Maimonides is a rationalist. Therefore, he cannot admit that there might be a situation in which the two goods were equally good, and therefore there was no obvious better or worse.
Yes, he could. He might say, therefore they're both equal. You have to choose whichever one you want. That's logical.
Right. Except that on the question, he would then not be in the position to say that when you chose one against the other, you were obviously doing a better thing as against a worse thing.
And that, in fact, the interesting language of the Rambam, he says, it appears to me. He says, I don't have any explicit source about what I'm about to say, but based on my knowledge, this is what I think. Interesting. I can't go into it, but there seems to be a Gemara explicitly against him. I'll have to reconcile another time. But I'm saying it's interesting. He says there's no explicit source, and there seems to be an explicit sourse, but don't worry, there'll be an answer for him as well.